The clink of silverware against plates filled the tense silence enveloping our dining room. Cole, my husband of 5 years, casually cleared his throat before dropping a bombshell that made my fork clatter to the floor. "Aunt May, have you considered selling your house?" May's eyes widened in disbelief, her frail hand trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. "Sell my home? Why on earth would I do that?" Cole shrugged nonchalantly. "Well, it's a large property. The upkeep can't be easy at your age. We could use the money to ensure you're comfortable and have enough for your remaining years." My jaw clenched as realization dawned. Was this his angle to get his hands on May's inheritance? The very thought made my blood boil. May shook her head vehemently. "This house has been in my family for generations. It's my life's work and memories. I won't abandon it, especially not for some quick cash." "But think about it pragmatically." Cole pressed, his voice taking on a condescending tone that made me cringe. "That old place is just sitting there, underutilized. Wouldn't you rather have the funds readily available instead of being house-rich but cash-poor?" "How dare you!" May's frail frame trembled with anger. "I've made my wishes clear. This is my home, and it's not for sale." I reached across the table, placing a comforting hand on May's arm. The anguish in her eyes tore at my heart. How could Cole be so callous, so driven by greed that he'd upset his beloved aunt like this? "Cole, that's enough," I said firmly, shooting him a warning glare. "May's decision should be respected." He scoffed and leaned back in his chair. "I'm just trying to be pragmatic here. But if you'd rather let sentimentality rule over common sense, be my guest." The contemptuous sneer on his face ignited a simmering rage within me. This wasn't about pragmatism. It was about his insatiable desire for wealth, no matter who got trampled in the process. May's cheeks glistened with unshed tears. "You've changed, Cole. The nephew I knew would never treat me with such disrespect." An uncomfortable silence settled over us, thick with unspoken accusations and broken trust. Cole's casual suggestion had shattered the illusion of familial harmony, exposing the greed festering beneath his charming facade. As I helped May to her room after dinner, her fragile hand clutched mine with a tremulous grip. "Thank you for standing up for me, dear. I don't know what's gotten into Cole lately." Squeezing her hand reassuringly, I fought back the surge of emotions roiling within me. Cole's appalling behavior had crossed a line, and I found myself questioning everything about the man I thought I knew. That night, as Cole pretended to sleep beside me, my mind raced with doubts and suspicions. What drove him to treat his beloved aunt with such callous disregard? Was his desire for wealth so all-consuming that he'd trample over family bonds without a second thought? One thing was certain. I wouldn't stand idly by while he plotted to rob May of her legacy. If protecting her meant going against my own husband, then so be it. This was a battle I intended to win, no matter the cost. The next morning, I confronted Cole about his outrageous proposal to May. His nonchalant shrug only stoked the fires of my growing outrage. "It was just a suggestion," he claimed, avoiding my accusatory glare. "May's sitting on a fortune with that oversized property. It only makes sense to liquidate an asset like that." "An asset?" I echoed incredulously. "That asset is her home, filled with a lifetime of cherished memories. How can you be so cold and calculating?" Cole had the audacity to look offended. "I'm just being pragmatic. You're letting emotions cloud your judgment. And you've clearly lost your moral compass." I shot back, my temper flaring. Our heated exchange was interrupted by a timid knock on the door. May stood there, her eyes puffy from crying, clutching a stack of papers. "What's going on?" she asked hesitantly, flinching at the tension crackling between us. Cole flashed her a reassuring smile that made my skin crawl. "Just a minor disagreement, Aunt May. No need to trouble yourself." She worried her trembling lip, conflicted over whether to speak up or not. Finally, she extended the papers towards me with a shaky hand. I think you should see these, Avery." I accepted them, my heart sinking at the dread etched on her face. As I flipped through the documents, the ugly truth became apparent. Cole was drowning in gambling debts that he'd expertly concealed from me. "You reckless fool," I erupted, hurling the incriminating pages at him. "Is this why you've been hounding May? To pay off your sordid debts and gambling losses?" Shame and anger warred across Cole's features as May gasped in horror. "Is this true?" Her voice quivered with hurt and disbelief. You've been pressuring me for money because of your irresponsible behavior? Cole recoiled, switching to damage control mode. Aunt May, you don't understand. It was a momentary lapse in judgment that snowballed out of control. Save your pathetic excuses, I snarled, positioning myself protectively in front of May. You've been lying and manipulating us from the start. Your greed knows no bounds. May clutched my arm, her tears flowing freely. All this time I thought he truly cared about my well-being, but he only saw me as a means to an end. I never meant to hurt you, Cole insisted, his expression a sickening mix of feigned remorse and bitter resentment. If you'd both been reasonable, it wouldn't have come to this. My hands balled into fists as white-hot fury coursed through me. Get out! I don't want your poisonous presence anywhere near May, not until you've taken a long, hard look at the despicable person you've become. To his credit, Cole didn't argue further. As he stormed out, May dissolved into heartbroken sobs, clinging to me like a lifeline. How could he betray us like this? She wept bitterly. After everything I've done for him. Cradling her frail form, I vowed to shelter her from Cole's callous machinations, no matter what it took. His wretched greed would not go unchallenged or unpunished. May's anguished cries only fueled the inferno of protective rage burning within me. Cole had awoken a vengeful force he could never have anticipated, a merciless fury driven by the sanctity of family bonds he'd violated so egregiously. As I comforted the devastated woman he'd exploited, I silently swore to make him pay for every tear she shed. Cole's transgressions would not go unanswered. He would reap the consequences of his reprehensible actions tenfold. After comforting May, I knew I needed leverage to protect her from Cole's avaricious schemes. Delving into her past seemed the logical place to start. May, I need to understand Cole's motivations better, I said gently. Is there something from your history that might explain his fixation with your assets? May's face crumpled, her eyes glistening with fresh tears. There are things from my past I've never spoken of, secrets I've kept buried even from my own family. My curiosity piqued, but I didn't want to cause her more anguish. You don't have to share anything you're not comfortable with. She gripped my hand with surprising strength. No, you need to know, especially now after Cole's betrayal. Taking a fortifying breath, May began reluctantly. Years ago, before you or Cole were born, I inherited a substantial sum from a distant relative, a fortune by any measure. I fought to keep my expression neutral, though my mind whirled with questions. An inheritance May had concealed from everyone? My relatives pressured me to invest it, to grow the money for future generations, she continued. But I always distrusted their motives, their greed masquerading as concern for the family legacy. Her gaze grew haunted, her voice dropping to a pained whisper. Looking back, I should have listened to my instincts, because when I refused their demands, everything went awry in the most terrible way. What happened? I asked, my heart hammering with dreadful premonitions. May shook her head, her eyes squeezed shut against the onslaught of memories. It still pains me to recount those events, even after all this time. Let's just say my defiance came at a very steep price. She lapsed into a heavy silence, leaving me to ponder the ominous implications of her words. An inheritance she'd rejected, a price she'd paid. The mystery surrounding her past deepened with every revelation. And you think this has something to do with why Cole is hounding you now? I prodded gently. I can't imagine what else it could be, she replied, a tremor of fear in her voice. Unless, no. Surely even Cole wouldn't stoop that low. Her reticence only fueled my suspicions about the dark secrets lurking in our family's history. Was the inheritance truly at the heart of Cole's despicable behavior? Or were there even more sinister motives driving his greed? Thanking May, I retreated to process this unsettling information. If Cole was aware of her inherited fortune, it would certainly explain his relentless hounding and callous treatment of his beloved aunt. The thought made my blood boil. To use underhanded tactics to rob May of her dues, it was unforgivable on every level. Yet, if Cole was indeed that corrupted by greed, I couldn't put anything past him. A small, petulant voice in the back of my mind tried to reason with me. Cole couldn't possibly be that much of a monster, could he? Perhaps you're overreacting, letting your emotions overshadow reason. But I quickly silenced that misguided thought. Cole's actions had already spoken louder than any feeble rationalization. By threatening May's peace and financial security, he'd crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. No, there would be no more benefit of the doubt, no more turning a blind eye. If plundering May's inheritance truly was his goal, then I would move heaven and earth to thwart him. Squaring my shoulders, I felt a surge of resolve harden my determination. I would leave no stone unturned in uncovering the full schemes and machinations, no matter how sordid the truth turned out to be. May's haunting words echoed in my mind. Even Cole wouldn't stoop that low. But deep down, I knew there were no depths too low for a man consumed by greed and hubris. With grim focus, I began mapping out my next moves to unravel this twisted saga, fueled by a simmering fury towards the man I once trusted completely. If Cole thought I would be a passive bystander, he was gravely mistaken. This was one battle he would not win, not while I still drew breath to protect May's legacy. Whatever it took, whatever the cost, I would ensure justice prevailed. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity as I discreetly began delving into May's past. Her reluctance to share full details only stoked my determination to uncover the truth, no matter how unsavory. My first stop was Julia, May's oldest and dearest friend. When I arrived at her doorstep, the surprise on her face quickly melted into concern. "Avery, dear, you look distraught. Is everything all right with May?" I shook my head grimly. "Not at all. I need to understand what really happened with her inheritance years ago." May was unclear on the details. Julia's brow furrowed as she ushered me inside. "I'd hoped those ghosts from the past would stay buried." She sighed heavily. "But I suppose you have a right to know, given the circumstances." As I listened with mounting horror, Julia painted a picture of familial treachery that made my stomach churn. According to her accounts, May's decision to keep her inheritance out of greedy relatives' hands led to inconceivable betrayal. "They tried every manner of deceit to get their clutches on that money," Julia recounted, her eyes glinting with righteous indignation. "And when May refused to capitulate, they resorted to theft." "Theft?" I echoed, my blood turning to ice. "You mean her own relatives stole the inheritance from her?" Julia nodded gravely. "The most wretched kind of violation, by those she should have been able to trust implicitly. It devastated poor May, who only wanted to preserve her financial security without outside meddling." My heart clenched for the gracious woman whose loved ones had callously robbed her. No wonder May had been so haunted by the past. "Do you know who was responsible?" I asked through gritted teeth, already dreading the answer. Julia's gaze grew haunted. From what I pieced together, it was an inside job. Someone in May's trusted inner circle with full knowledge of how to access and abscond with the funds. A sickening feeling coiled in my gut as the overarching implication settled in. If May's own flesh and blood had been willing to commit such an atrocious act, what depths would Cole stoop to in pursuit of that same ill-gotten fortune? "You don't think?" I trailed off, unable to give voice to the nefarious notion brewing. Julia looked at me with solemn eyes. "I pray I'm wrong, Avery, but given how unscrupulous Cole has proven to be, I wouldn't put anything past that wretched man." Her accusing words resonated within me like a damning judgment. Was my own husband not only aware of May's lost inheritance, but also hell-bent on claiming it through equally underhanded means? The notion made me ill. Yet try as I might, I couldn't dismiss it out of hand after witnessing Cole's despicable behavior firsthand. I left Julia's home in a daze, my mind spinning as I processed this chilling revelation about May's tragic history. If Cole did indeed know about the stolen fortune, his relentless haranguing of May took on a whole new sinister context. By the time I reached home, a cold clarity had descended upon me. I could no longer rationalize away Cole's blatantly nefarious actions. Not when every new discovery only cemented his unwavering greed and lack of conscience. May was waiting in the living room, her eyes rimmed with fresh tears. Before I could open my mouth, she held up a trembling hand. "I know why you've been digging, Avery. You're trying to determine if Cole's treatment of me ties back to—" She swallowed hard. "To that horrid situation with my inheritance so long ago." I nodded mutely, awaiting her verdict with dread knotting my stomach. May's face crumpled with disdain and sorrow. After the way he's behaved, trying to bully me into signing over my assets, I can no longer delude myself otherwise. Cole must have discovered what happened, and now he's just as hungry for that money as my thieving relatives were back then. Her words unlocked the floodgates of rage within me. How dare Cole sink to such unconscionable depths, all for the sake of satisfying his vile, unquenchable avarice? As May dissolved into fresh sobs, I pulled her into a fierce embrace, my mind whirring with recriminations and retribution. No more tiptoeing around the unavoidable truth. Cole's treachery knew no bounds when his greed was involved, and I would ensure he paid a soul-crushing price for violating the sanctity of family in such a reprehensible manner. The next evening, I summoned what little remained of my frayed nerves and cornered Cole the moment he returned from work. His practiced nonchalance only fueled my fury. "We need to talk. Now." My tone brooked no argument. Cole arched a brow but said nothing as I led him into the study and shut the door behind us. "Is this about your latest rift with Aunt May?" he asked, feigning innocence. "I assure you I only have her best interests at heart." "Cut the crap, Cole," I exploded, no longer able to contain my outrage. "I know all about May's inheritance from years ago. The one her own flesh and blood stole right from under her." His features hardened, the mask dropping as realization crept in. "I should have known you'd go digging into ancient history, trying to vilify me." "You make it damn easy to vilify you with your reprehensible actions." I shot back, slamming my palm on the desk. "Were you just waiting for the perfect moment to try robbing May of her rightful dues, just like those thieving relatives?" Cole's lip curled in a contemptuous sneer. "Don't act so high and mighty, like you're incapable of the same greed. That inheritance should have been ours to control from the start." My jaw dropped at his audacious admission. "You vile, repugnant snake. So you did know all about May's fortune, and you've just been waiting to sink your venomous fangs into it." "Don't take that sanctimonious tone with me." Cole spat, his icy eyes glittering with malice. "All I've done is look out for our future, our financial security. God knows May is too feeble-minded to properly utilize that money anyway." My hand connected with his cheek before I could stop myself, the resounding slap echoing through the room like a thunderclap. Cole recoiled, clutching his reddened face as bewildered fury washed over his features. "How dare you insult May like that? After all, she sacrificed for this family," I raged, shaking with equal parts fury and disgust. "She entrusted you, welcomed you like a son, and this is how you repay her unconditional love? With greed, deceit, and utter disrespect?" Cole opened his mouth, but I cut him off with a contemptuous slash of my hand. "Save your pathetic justifications. I know the full truth now. You were just waiting for the perfect opportunity to manipulate May into signing away her assets, making you the rich, heartless snake you've always aspired to be." "You arrogant shrew." Cole's face contorted with rage. "You have no idea the sacrifices I've made for this family, while May clings to her precious home and memories like some doting old fool. Maybe it's time harsh realities supplanted blind sentimentality." His callous words were the final straw. In that moment, I saw him for the soulless, rapacious man he'd truly become, the antithesis of everything I once loved. "Get out," I uttered, my voice low and shaking with revulsion. "Get out of my sight before I do something we'll both regret." Cole opened his mouth as if to protest, but I shot him a withering look that stopped him cold. For several tense moments, an oppressive silence descended, thick with unspoken accusations and severed bonds of trust. Finally, without a backwards glance, Cole stalked out, slamming the door behind him hard enough to rattle the windows. I collapsed into a chair, drained yet electrified by the confrontation. There was no going back, no chance of reconciliation or redemption. Cole had shown his true, ugly colors, a grotesque palette of greed, manipulation, and supreme selfishness that left no room for loyalty or integrity. As I sat there, my mind cycled through the abhorrent realizations that had shattered my world. Tears of anguished resolve streamed down my cheeks. May's goodness and vulnerability had been mercilessly preyed upon by the very person who should have cherished her unconditionally. And for what? The alluring siren call of ill-gotten wealth. But I refused to let Cole's repugnant actions go unanswered or unpunished. May deserved justice. No, demanded it after such a vile desecration of family values. Filled with a renewed sense of purpose, I rose from my chair, facing my reflection with defiant eyes. Cole's transgressions would have consequences. I would stake my very life on ensuring that karmic truth. From that moment on, I was a woman reborn, driven by the flames of a vengeful reckoning yet to be unleashed. The path before me was clear: to pursue the truth and ensure Cole paid for his despicable ways, no matter where that pursuit led. May's honor and legacy depended on my willingness to walk through the fires of reckoning, and I would do so without hesitation or remorse, because some injustices demanded the most uncompromising justice. In the days following my explosive confrontation with Cole, I channeled every ounce of my energy into unearthing the full depth of his deceit. I refused to let him slither away unscathed after his betrayal. My investigation led me down a serpentine trail of fraudulent financial transactions and underhanded business dealings, all methodically concealed under layers of lies and misdirection by my conniving husband. The more I uncovered, the sicker I felt. It became glaringly apparent that Cole's obsession with May's inheritance was merely the rotten cherry atop a fetid cake of avarice and immorality. The stolen funds had fed his gambling addictions for years, patching the holes his self-destructive habits created. But as his debts spiraled out of control, May's assets became the elusive golden ring he needed to grasp. Cole had been playing me for a fool since our very first days together. His charming facade was really just an intricately woven mask concealing a remorseless Machiavellian schemer consumed by greed. The evidence I compiled, including documentation from former business associates turned disillusioned whistleblowers, painted a damning portrait of unrepentant depravity and deceit. Cole's misdeeds ran the gamut from embezzlement to investment fraud to garden-variety conning of the elderly out of their life savings. He was the proverbial snake oil salesman, spinning lies and parlor tricks to enrich himself at the expense of anyone gullible enough to trust him, and I had been his biggest, most oblivious mark for far too long. That realization unleashed a maelstrom of disgust, anger, and shame swirling within me. How could I have been so blind to the monster lurking behind that genial mask all those years? When I finally confronted Cole again, cornering him with the mountain of proof I'd gathered, he didn't even bother denying the allegations. Instead, he greeted me with that same infuriatingly smug look that made my blood boil. "So you've finally wised up to my little side ventures, have you?" He clucked his tongue in mock disappointment. "And here I thought you were smarter than the average dupe. You unrepentant snake!" I hurled the insult at him like a dagger. "Did you ever feel even a shred of conscience about manipulating and exploiting everyone around you?" Cole shrugged, unbothered. "Conscience is an overrated indulgence for the weak. I simply seized opportunities as they arose. Nothing personal, just savvy business practices." "And May? Was plundering her inheritance just another business opportunity for you?" I spat the words with utter contempt. A sinister grin split his features. "Actually, that was one of my grander endgame plans. Once I convinced dear, doddering Aunt May to sign over her property rights, her assets would have been as good as mine to liquidate." The frank admission of his schemes to defraud May, spoken with such nonchalant glee, made me physically ill. This was the true depth of Cole's moral bankruptcy, laid bare without remorse or regret. "You make me sick," I hissed through clenched teeth. "To think I was fool enough to marry a degenerate con artist like you." Cole's oily chuckle grated on my every nerve. "Oh, don't be so high and mighty. I simply embraced the philosophy of exploiting weaknesses to get ahead. You can't fault a guy for being a pragmatic opportunist." "I can and will fault you for being a soulless, manipulative parasite," I shot back with venom. "And rest assured, you'll be held accountable for every cent stolen, every life ruined by your despicable greed." Cole's mocking smile remained infuriatingly intact. "Is that a threat, dear wife? Because you'll need more than a few flimsy documents to make that a reality." Squaring my jaw, I met his hubris-laced stare with defiant eyes. "Watch me, you wretched bastard. I'm just getting started on making you pay for your multitude of sins. Once I'm through, you'll be exposed as the shameless fraud you are, left with nothing but the bitter taste of karma's reckoning." His responding laugh was equal parts unnerving and infuriating. The unbridled arrogance of a man who underestimated the fury of the woman he'd systematically deceived at every turn. As Cole strutted away, I suppressed the overwhelming urge to give him one final dose of harsh realities with my bare hands. No, I realized with grim resolve, violence would only give him far too easy an out. He deserved a more lasting, excruciating reckoning, one that would rob him of every ill-gotten gain and shred of hubris. And I vowed to be the implacable force delivering that bitter justice unto him. In the days after my explosive confrontation with Cole, I found an unlikely ally in Carrie, one of May's oldest friends. A retired private investigator, Carrie possessed a well-honed instinct for sniffing out fraud and deception. "That snake husband of yours has left a greasy trail a mile wide," she said grimly after reviewing the evidence I'd gathered. "With my contacts and expertise, we can ensure he doesn't wriggle away from facing the consequences." With Carrie's guidance, I assembled an ironclad dossier of Cole's financial crimes and underhanded schemes, carefully documenting every sordid transaction. The paper trail led to offshore accounts, money laundering fronts, and a dizzying array of corporate shells he hid behind. "The man's a regular Wolf of Wall Street minus the charm," Carrie observed wryly. "He's burned so many investors and associates over the years that half the city would line up to watch his downfall." Over hushed meetings in dimly lit diners and secluded parking garages, more whistleblowers and disgruntled victims emerged from the shadows to share their horror stories. Each account painted Cole as a silver-tongued fraudster without an ounce of conscience, lying and cheating his way to wealth. With every new revelation, my outrage toward this man I'd once loved only intensified. Cole was the worst kind of narcissistic parasite, targeting the vulnerable and desperate for his personal enrichment. Finally, when our meticulously compiled case files were complete, Carrie leveraged her legal connections to arrange a reckoning Cole would never see coming. It began with a certified letter summoning him to an urgent business meeting with the IRS and several other financial regulatory bodies. With his hubris in full bloom, Cole strolled into the ambush without the slightest inkling of what awaited him. I'll never forget the look of stunned disbelief on his face when the authorities entered and placed him under arrest, a soul-withering blend of confusion and indignant rage. "What is the meaning of this?" he spluttered as they slapped cuffs on his wrists. "I'm an upstanding businessman, not some common criminal." I stepped into his line of sight, chin raised with smug satisfaction. "Did you really think your trail of fraud and embezzlement wouldn't catch up to you eventually, Cole?" His eyes widened with outraged comprehension as Carrie and her team revealed the exhaustive evidence we'd compiled. Every incriminating bank statement, every insider testimony, every money trail of stolen funds. Bile rose in my throat as Cole shot me a look of pure, unbridled hatred. "So this is how it's going to be?" he spat, all traces of his con-man charm evaporating. "You and these glorified badge lickers unleashing an inquisition against me?" "Don't flatter yourself," Carrie interjected dryly. "This is just the first domino in ensuring all your elaborate financial Jenga towers come crumbling down around you. There won't be a single cent or asset for you to hide behind once we're through." Cole surged forward, halted only by his restraints and the unmistakable threat of Carrie's associates closing in. "This isn't over," he raged at me, spittle flying. "You think stripping me of money and clout means you've won, but you're sadly mistaken. This is just the opening salvo, you self-righteous harpy." I stayed silent, refusing to grant him the satisfaction of a response, because in that moment, with the authorities hauling him away in disgrace, I tasted the first delicious sips of the revenge I'd sought for so long. As his shouts of protest faded down the hallway, Carrie placed a congratulatory hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing, kid. Cole's callous thievery won't be forgotten or absolved." I nodded solemnly, my heart a churning cauldron of vindication and unresolved fury. Taking Cole down was merely the opening salvo in my crusade to decimate his ill-gotten empire and regain May's honor. Even as the law's engine of justice began grinding him down, I vowed my personal brand of reckoning had only just begun. Cole's arrogant parting words still rang in my ears, mocking me. He seemed to think this arrest was a minor setback, one he'd inevitably rebound from through bribery and manipulation of a broken system. Little did he know, I was already 10 steps ahead of his nefarious scheming, mobilizing a multi-pronged counterattack to dismantle his web of fraud once and for all. He would learn there were debts that couldn't be absolved by money alone, and the scale of justice I'd ensure he faced would be utterly uncompromising. Because for every grift and betrayal he'd callously committed, there would be an equally unsparing penance extracted. As Carrie and I left the building where Cole sat cooling his heels in custody, I felt a surge of icy resolve take hold. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned and hell-bent on righteous reclamation. Chapter 8. Karma's Call. Over the ensuing weeks, Cole's gilded house of cards came crashing down in spectacular fashion. Thanks to the mountain of evidence we'd compiled, law enforcement easily unraveled his intricate financial fraud schemes one by one. Anonymous tips and whistleblower testimonies poured in, detailing years of embezzlement, money laundering, investment scams, you name it. Slowly but surely, every ill-gotten asset Cole had amassed through treachery got seized or frozen. I'll never forget the look of broken despair on his face when the final guillotine dropped, May's inheritance being awarded back to her, every penny of the stolen millions accounted for and returned after decades in Cole's grubby clutches. With his wretched life's work officially in ruins and bankruptcy imminent, Cole grew increasingly unhinged, alternating between bouts of vicious rage and pathetic bargaining attempts for leniency. "This isn't over, not by a long shot," he snarled one day, glaring at me through the steel mesh of the visitation room. "I'll find a way to slither out of this pit you've dug for me, and when I do, you'll be the first to suffer." I merely shook my head at his empty bravado, long since inured to his impotent threats. Deluding yourself with fantasies of escape or revenge won't undo the harsh reality awaiting you, Cole. The system has you dead to rights. His sneer twisted into an uglier rictus. Always so smug and sanctimonious, playing the self-appointed crusader for justice. You're nothing but a self-righteous, vindictive shrew who can't handle being outmaneuvered at her own game. Leaning forward, I met his feral glare with icy calmness. "You've had this karmic reckoning coming for a very long time. Every financial titan you've swindled, every family member you've exploited without a shred of remorse, their collective fury has finally coalesced into your undoing. And I was merely the lighting rod focusing that righteous outrage into merciless retribution. You and your moral high horse can go straight to hell," Cole erupted, slamming his fists on the metal tabletop with a resounding bang. "I clawed my way up from nothing to become someone, and it sickens me that a bitter, envious harpy like yourself is celebrated for tearing down everything I built." The guards instantly moved to restrain the raging Cole, but I waved them off with an impassive look. His desperate tantrums and bloated sense of self-importance no longer provoked any reaction beyond weary pity. "What you deluded yourself into building was nothing more than a flimsy facade of fraud and deceit," I said coolly. "One well-placed push was all it took for your craven house of cards to crumble." Cole's face turned a mottled red as incoherent curses spilled from his lips. I leaned back in my chair, unmoved. "I'll give you this, though. Beneath all that cowardly avarice and self-aggrandizing bravado, you did have a certain perverse talent. If only you'd applied it towards nobler pursuits instead of selfish vice." "Is that what this is about?" Cole sneered through gritted teeth. "You projecting your pathetic moral crusade onto me as some twisted form of character judgment? Please spare me the saintly self-righteousness." I let his bitter words wash over me as I rose from my seat. No amount of indignance or grandstanding will change what you are at your core. A pitiful, conscienceless grifter devoid of any higher purpose. I just did the world a small service by ushering you off its stage before you could victimize anyone else. With that final salvo, I turned and strode out, not sparing Cole's sputtering, enraged figure a backward glance. As the door closed behind me, I exhaled a long breath, feeling like a great weight had finally been lifted from my soul. Outside, May waited with tears shining in her eyes. "You did it, dear Avery. You righted the most egregious wrong and made that poor, deluded fool answer for his craven transgressions." I pulled her into a fierce hug, emotion welling up within me. It was the least I could do after he violated the sanctity of family in such a despicable manner. May squeezed me tightly, her soft voice thick with sentiment. "You've shown more courage and integrity through this ordeal than most muster in a lifetime. I only regret you had to go through such turmoil because of my mistakes from the past." Pulling back, I cupped her wizened cheek with one hand. This had nothing to do with any failings on your part, May. Cole alone is the architect of his ruination through his reprehensible choices. Her watery smile was one of immense gratitude and hard-won pride. Regardless, you've ensured my legacy will be one of righteousness prevailing over greed and deception. I can finally rest easy knowing justice has been served. As I escorted May to the waiting car, I felt an overwhelming sense of clarity and purpose. Though the road had been arduous, I'd achieved what I'd set out to do: safeguard May's honor while dismantling Cole's wretched empire of fraud and manipulation. My vengeful crusade was complete, the debts settled in full, and while Cole festered behind bars, destined for a miserable, debt-ridden existence, May and I could embrace a future of peace and nobility restored. True justice had been rendered in the most uncompromising fashion, and I vowed to savor that cathartic victory for the rest of my days.